Stanton, the chair will recognize Mr. Rouser from North Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank the Madam Chair and Madam Administrator. Thank you so much for being here. As my friend and colleague Garrett Graves, pardon me. I know Grigsby somewhere else. As my colleague Mr. Graves mentioned, there's no question you have a tough job. I will reiterate what he underscored, in that the duplication of benefits really is a big issue for a lot of us. And we would love to see the administration stick with the intent of Congress, on that, because that certainly is a big issue for many of our disaster survivors. Speaking of disasters, we have a lot of hurricanes come through. Obviously, my district is southeastern North Carolina. In 2016, we had Hurricane Matthew, had a lot of flooding with that. In 2018, we had Hurricane Florence, a tremendous amount of flooding with that. And, it's quite common for residents who live in condominiums, homeowners associations, housing cooperatives, that when those natural disasters hit, they can get no assistance from FEMA. And just curious if you foresee that will continue to be the case, or if there's been any internal discussion about modifying the rules and regulations to where they would be eligible moving forward.
So, Congressman, people who own their homes, whether that be a individual home, whether that be a condo, whether they're a renter in one of those homes, they're all eligible for our programs. Our decisions are based on a number of factors. One is most certainly the amount of insurance they have and what insurance covers, and then whether they have actual damages to their homes and what we can repair for those homes. But we also provide things like rental assistance, which people are eligible for regardless of whether they're a homeowner or a renter. If there's something specific that you have an example of, I'd be happy to work with your staff to look at it and better understand what that circumstance was. But there's no factor that does not allow somebody who owns a condo to be eligible for our programs.
Well, historically, FEMA has been very resistant to helping those that are technically classified as a homeowners association, and many people live in, neighborhoods, big and small, that have a homeowners association, and therefore they can't get debris picked up. There's always, municipalities get reimbursed through public assistance for picking up debris, et cetera. Well, they won't pick up debris in a homeowners association, for that reason. I have some legislation that will help clarify this and, make everybody's life a little easier. It is H.R. 3777, the Disaster Assistance Fairness Act. But I'm not so sure that what's included in the legislation couldn't be addressed with a simple rulemaking, because it very much fits within the intent and scope of FEMA's work during disaster recovery. And so I'd love to visit with you more about that and offline, and appreciate your attention to it.
Yeah, thank you for that further explanation, and we'd be happy to provide direct technical assistance, drafting technical assistance on what you're working on.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rouser. With that, the chair recognizes Mr. Ryan from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for allowing me to join. Thank you, Administrator, not only for your service to our nation now, but also for your service to New York in your previous roles. As I believe you're aware, and certainly your team is aware, several communities in my district in the Hudson Valley of New York, Cornwall, Highland Falls, Fort Montgomery, and West Point were absolutely devastated in early July with unprecedented over 8 inches of rain in just a few hours, absolutely overwhelming all of the systems, processes, resources that the community had ever had to deal with or prepare for. Tragically, we did lose one young woman to that flood. We've had hundreds displaced. Since the flood, my team and I have personally spoken with hundreds of affected residents. As is always the case, and you know this well, each of their stories is just heartbreaking, one that I cannot stop thinking about a veteran in my community, 100% disability rating from the VA, who suffered TBI and other serious injuries, still fighting and struggling to get any help to rebuild his home that was completely condemned. And despite all the work by you and your team, despite the declaration of a federal disaster and some of the public assistance, folks like him and hundreds of others are still without any help and any relief. Almost none of them had flood insurance because of the topography of where they live. It was absolutely almost impossible that they could have experienced something like this, but tragically they did. So I want to commend you and thank the President and the administration for pushing to declare the disaster declaration, for working with a good team on the ground to start to get the public assistance flowing. But the number one question that I hear still in our office is, why have we not received an individual assistance declaration? Both the breadth, but really the depth of the damage for several hundred families is just devastating. And the gentleman's story that I shared is just one. We've got kids living in condemned homes because they just have no other options, seniors without homes. So I've invited you to come. I know you're very busy, but I would ask you or one of your senior leaders to commit to come and look those folks in the eye with me, help explain what's going on, and brainstorm what we can do to help them. Can we count on you to do that, Administrator?
Yeah, absolutely. I obviously don't have the specifics on why we haven't yet. Happy to look into that personally, but you have my commitment. If I can't make it, one of my senior leaders can join you to better understand the impacts to this community.
I appreciate it. And building on questions from several of my colleagues, specifically Mr. Huffman, can you explain why in the midst of a disaster like this, it is so darn hard and complicated and opaque, which seems to be a theme that we've heard throughout the questioning, that we can't just answer residents who are devastated why they're not getting individual assistance, and what we can do to change that, what my team and I, what all the local officials and our governor and our county leadership and local leadership who've all been working as a team. Can you help explain that?
Yeah, there are a number of factors that we look at when we are making a determination on whether to recommend a declaration for both public assistance and individual assistance. And again, a good portion of that falls on what the capacity of not just the local jurisdiction is, but what the state should be able to do to also support. And we understand when there's communities, small rural communities in states like New York that have large urban centers, that it creates a greater capacity that the state should be able to come in and also provide a level of assistance. And so all of those are factors that are taken into consideration, not just the impact to the one community, but how much the state should also be able to support.
And I appreciate your commitment to personally look into this. I can tell you on the ground, while the state has contributed significantly, it is nowhere near meeting the need, specifically for folks, frankly, that don't qualify for some of the income thresholds, but had no flood insurance and are far beyond their means to repair devastating damage. So we have to, as Americans, be able to figure out how to navigate this. And myself and my team will be available anytime, anywhere to you and your team. So thank you to your folks that have been on the ground and helping. And we'll certainly be persistent in following up with you on your kind commitment today. So thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair, I apologize.
The chair thanks the gentleman. The chair is now in agreement with the ranking member that we're going to go for a second round. And so the chair will recognize himself for the beginning of that second round of questions. Administrator Criswell, I think you highlighted the CREW Act in your testimony now and verbally numerous times regarding how it helped in staffing shortages. Yet in your letter and your responses to letters from Chairman Graves, FEMA resources and personnel have been diverted to help deal with the border crisis. And I'd ask the unanimous consent to have these emails admitted to the record and without objection so ordered. On March 17th, an email of yours provided to the committee in response to these oversight letters shows that you emailed Secretary Mayorkas that both you and FEMA's Region 3 administrator had discussed the current state of coordination based on her observations. everything you said is kind of unclear because it's heavily redacted, as you can see here, but what I can see is that you expressed concerns committing her to no longer than 30 days, and then on the following day, on March 18th, you received an email from the Secretary thanking you for supporting FEMA Region 3 administrators' dedication to the border coordination with IMAT support for a 30-day period. Now, the IMAT teams are special teams, as I understand it, that deal with disasters. Does that mean you and the Secretary agree there's a disaster on the border? And you sent one of these, go ahead, ma'am.
Our incident management assistance teams are unique teams that are trained to deal with complex problems. And the skill set that they bring, specifically the team that our Region 3 administrator leads, is a team made up of collateral leaders across our agency designed to support a variety of different incidents to help bring that level of collaboration, coordination, and communication, the skill set that our emergency managers bring to all of the problems that we solve.
Okay, so it's not about disasters.
So this was specifically about creating an organizational structure to help support our partners across the department establish a sound, unified coordination.
So I guess by transposition, then, if it's not a disaster and it's to create this team, then we're saying that apparently Secretary Mayorkas and Department of Homeland Security doesn't have what it needs, is not equipped to handle what's happening on the southern border, because they're calling on you. You're resource challenged by your admission. You even were concerned per your email. Then in November, you emailed the Secretary, indicated that he had requested support again from your Region 3 administrator on the border. And I would remind you that Region 3 covers Pennsylvania and the district I am proud to represent. And I'm concerned about those folks in the district that are paying the taxes for FEMA to support them, and to remind everybody that Region 3, the district we're talking about, or the region we're talking about, had 11 major disaster declarations, not including COVID, during that period. I'm concerned, as you are, how many personnel, how many people did FEMA send to the border, and what was the duration, since I can't find out from these emails?
The specific instance that you are talking about with our Region 3 regional administrator, again, is part of an IMAT team that's made up of collateral personnel from across our agency, many from headquarters, our Region 3.
Okay, that's great. How many for how long?
They have a handful of people. I don't know exactly how many from that team, but that team is only 12 people. And they
So it wouldn't be more than 12?
It would not be more than 12.
Okay, and you don't know how long or how many instances at this point?
That team was sent to here in DC to work with our partners across the department to help them establish what is now the Southwest Border Coordination Center, and they helped them.
Okay, but while they were here in DC or out the Southwest border, they weren't focused on Region 3, which is Pennsylvania, which is what they were hired to do. It's what they're supposed, that's their daily responsibility, right? And while we're having disasters in that region, they're focused on Washington, DC, and the border particularly. I mean, that's what I see here. I mean,
Again, the only person on that team from Region 3 is the one person who is the lead. This is a team that's
But that's also the person in Region 3 that's the lead for Region 3.
But this
right?
team is made up of collateral personnel to come help support a variety of incidents.
I get it,
We
but
happened to
my point
activate them
is
for
that
one.
this person is not focused on the regions that's having disasters because they're focused on the border. And while we might disagree or agree why the border disaster is happening, I would contend that it's happening because of the policies of this administration. So the people in Pennsylvania that are paying for their region administrator don't get their region administrator because the administration determines that that person is going to be on the Southwest border or in Washington, D.C., dealing with a Southwest border problem caused by this administration. Let me ask you this final question. Who's paying for that? Who's paying for that?
For the Region 3.
For the IMAT team, for the Region 3 coordinator, for the person that's supposed to be in Pennsylvania, that's in Washington, D.C., dealing with the Southwest border, who's paying for that?
These are part of our appropriated.
FEMA is paying for that. So FEMA's paying for the border, right? So when you pay your taxes and we say, oh, well, that's all going to the Department of Homeland Security, this portion to secure the border, that's not true. Department of Homeland Security is now requiring FEMA to take some of their disaster relief people and send them somewhere to deal with the border. That's how we're also dealing with it. So it's costing doubly. Not only is Homeland Security, and by the way, I don't know if people realize this, but you're not supposed to be duplicating services that are provided by another agency, whether it's interior, whether it's forestry. You're doing that with planting trees as well, by the way. That's another story. But on this occasion, you are duplicating services that are supposed to be handled by the Department of Homeland Security with FEMA dollars. And yet FEMA is demanding and asking, and maybe rightly so in many cases, for a supplemental for disaster assistance funding. At the same time, they're spending America's tax-paying dollars that are supposed to go to disaster relief on the southwest border in a disaster created by policy by this administration. With that, I yield, and I recognize the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus.
Thank you. Let's go back and talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. It's been called the greatest investment in environmental policy in a lifetime. One of the things that it did was authorize FEMA's public assistance and hazard mitigation programs to provide reimbursement for the use of low carbon materials and incorporate future climate projections into their emergency management plans. Use net zero energy as well. Would you talk about how that has been helpful, how you're leveraging that, how it fits into your overall recovery and replacement or rebuilding schemes?
We're grateful for that added ability to reimburse jurisdictions that use this type of construction methodology to, one, increase their resilience as we're rebuilding, but also reduce the impact on our environment. And so this is a new program. These are the types of projects that take years to build. I'm very excited to see how our jurisdictions across the country are now going to be able to build back in a way that not only makes them more resilient, but makes them better for the environment as we go forward.
Wouldn't this kind of epitomize build back better, so we don't build back just the way it was before the disaster, so that if that incident occurs again, we are faced with the whole same problem one more time?
Absolutely. Our goal is to build back better so communities do not have to repeat the complex recoveries that they're facing today.
So in the long run, this would be a more efficient use of taxpayer dollars, and it'd probably be cheaper as you, amortize it out over future disasters.
Every dollar that we invest in mitigation saves $6 in recovery.
Okay. And is that across all kinds of disasters, whether it's fire or hurricane or whatever? It's just a general?
That's the current studies show that $1 invested in mitigation saves $6 in recovery. I'm sure it varies slightly from type of event to type of event, but that is the recent study that came out shows how much mitigation does save our taxpayers in the end from recovery.
So this would be a good thing to save taxpayer dollars while also trying to save the planet.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chair, thanks the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Lamov.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thanks for allowing me to sit in here and for a second round of questions today. Appreciate it. So, Ms. Criswell, again, thank you for your appearance and for the coordination we've been able to have with FEMA in Northern California after the many disasters. So, in recovery from wildfires in my own district, we've had a lot of great strides, but some bureaucratic challenges, not necessarily in your department, have delayed progress and really true recovery so that victims can get back to normal. So just removing hazardous trees or to build housing, fix a road, the local jurisdiction must do a NEPA. Every project within the recovery process has a separate NEPA requirement, which can take a year to produce, and oftentimes for things that are very basic. You wouldn't need a full-blown NEPA for changing a culvert or repairing especially already existing infrastructure. So not much has changed on the process of how NEPAs are done. So my constituents continue to say, hey, this is such a pain for them. It really does take more time, and sometimes opportunities as grant dollars run out and permits, other types of permits may expire. So, or more conditions keep getting added on. So it would be, I believe, and many folks have weighed in with me, that couldn't we have one big regional NEPA after, in this case, a wildfire for the whole burn scar and have that applicable for all recovery and mitigation projects tied to a disaster that was declared by the president. Wouldn't that seem like a common sense way of doing it? Just having an area-wide, in this case, burn scar-wide NEPA, and do it as a catch-all instead of so much duplication like this zone, that zone, this project. Is that something we could strive for, do you believe?
There are a number of policies out there when we're doing our environmental and historic reviews, and NEPA is certainly one of those that are out there. There are tools in our toolbox that can do programmatic reviews, but again, each instance is very different. We would have to work with each jurisdiction to better understand how we can apply broader application of our tools, which we have done in some areas, but we can't do it in every area because they're all so specific. And so I can't give you a general answer, but happy to continue to work with you on ways that we can streamline this process, because we also recognize it's one of those pieces of this recovery and rebuilding effort that has some of the longer timelines associated with it.
Well, thank you. Indeed, in the Paradise area, the campfire, we're going to be 5 years in November, and we're still chasing permits to remove hazardous trees. These are dead trees that are, not going to be part of the landscape or a positive part. Maybe a handful for woodpeckers, but not to the extent there's acres and acres. And this is still keeps just a dark cloud over recovery, over building. And indeed, getting insurance again for the area. The insurance companies are pulling out of California and pulling out of areas like this, even though what you would really look at, the risk has changed completely after that, such a devastating fire, such a complete fire. Once these trees are removed, it'll be a much more insurable area for folks. And you have folks, one lady, one anecdote, and I'll stop. What a lady and her, I think, 2 kids were when they're in their home, and during a wind event, trees were falling over, dead trees, and you could hear them cracking that haven't fallen yet. She finally decided she was gonna have to get her family out of her home because she was within reach of some of the trees, and go take a hotel down the hill in the town of Chico rather than stay in her home, because we keep hanging on with an inability to quickly and efficiently remove the hazardous trees that still exist there. So we don't need to NEPA to death every little project. Indeed, a coordination of projects into one. The darn NEPA doesn't teach you that much anyway. I don't know if they even read the thing, at the end of the day. Is it going to affect a yellow-toed salamander or what have you? The work is going to get done. It needs to get done. It's just a lot more pain. So if you could, we need help on that Lake Madrone thing, as we mentioned a while ago. And if in your conversations with the regulators on this, please emphasize that a broader approach, a burn scar approach, would be very helpful for everybody, I'm sure for your department and for the people that are actually victims. So thank you for that, and I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Are there any further questions from any members of the subcommittee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I would like to thank each of the witness for her testimony and for being here today. It's tough questions, tough job. We appreciate you. And we thank you for coming and taking the heat. This hearing is adjourned.